a reduced flow of glycol to the nozzle. So it wasn't just the right side of the 737 which didn't get enough glycol. It was the whole aircraft.
It was not a very thorough de-icing job that was done on that airplane. It was not that good. It was marginal at best.
But the investigators know this is far from conclusive proof that Flight 90 was contaminated with snow and ice when it took off. Ground crew used the same de-icing unit on other aircraft without incident. So although substandard, it may still have done an adequate job. If Hendricks' hunch is to hold up, he needs better evidence. What his team discover next shocks them all.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna put a little reverse on this.
Captain Wheaton used reverse thrust during pushback from Gate 12. Thrust reversers are normally used as a braking system when an aircraft lands.
Are you sure?
They should never be used before takeoff in wintry conditions for one simple reason. The reversers redirect the jet of hot air leaving the back of the engines towards the front of the aircraft. This can shoot a cloud of slush onto the wing and into the engine inlets. In sub-zero temperatures, the slush can refreeze within minutes. The use of reverse thrust is further evidence snow or ice could have caused the disaster.
It was very poor pilot judgment to do it. Not a good idea.
Then Hendricks gets another break. A member of his team tracks down an extraordinary photograph. It's a snapshot of Flight 90 taken by a passenger in another plane at approximately 3:20 p.m., just 10 minutes after de-icing finished. The image is grainy, but it shows fresh snow is already on the aircraft. The photograph is further evidence that the 737 may have been contaminated after it was de-iced, regardless of how well the job was done. By day 4 of the investigation, most of the bodies have been recovered. The focus of the salvage operation can now move to the wreckage. The parts are taken to a hangar at Washington National Airport for detailed examination, but they yield no clues. And the two crucial black box flight recorders are still missing. Finding them is a daunting task. Divers are equipped with an acoustic homing device. But the tangled wreckage is spread over an area of dark, freezing water the size of a football pitch. The media is hungry for answers. But NTSB spokesman Francis McAdams still can't announce any breakthroughs.
As I told you before, I have no idea until we get all of the evidence.
The investigators turn to the one card they haven't yet played: the survivors.
Survivors are in the airplane. They hear sounds, they feel bumps and grinds and hear noises. They supply an awful lot of information.
Joe Stiley describes how Flight 90 shook violently before it crashed. His words confirm the investigators' suspicions. They know this could be the result of ice and snow, disrupting airflow over the wings. But then, Joe reveals that the 737 seemed slow and sluggish during its takeoff run. Why could this be? Other aircraft didn't have this problem, despite the snowy conditions. Hendricks and his team are mystified. Then, 7 days after the crash, a diver picks up a faint signal. He follows it through the icy water until he can just make out a tangled mass of wreckage. He carefully pulls away twisted pieces of razor-sharp metal and hits the jackpot. In his torch beam, he spots one of the flight data recorders, then the other. It's the moment everyone involved in the investigation has been praying for.
After the recovery, Sechrist lifted one recorder over his head in victory. A big moment for the salvage team after a week of frustration.
They've got to see me out. All right!
When the word reaches the team that the recorders have been found and are being recovered, that is a very good piece of information.
The investigators rush the black boxes to their labs. After days of speculation, they're about to find out exactly what happened in the seconds leading up to the crash. They're excited, but they also know they're about to listen to the voices of the dead.
Boy, this is bad. Probably the worst snow I've ever seen. You know, it's been a while since we've been de-iced.
The team are stunned when they realize both pilots can see snow on their wings, yet they don't turn back for more de-icing.
I mean, this one's got about a quarter to half an inch of snow on it all the way down. I got a little on mine.
I was amazed, perplexed, wonderment, if you will, that under the regulations, the federal air regulations, you're not allowed to take off with snow or ice or frost adhering to your wings.
Could this be why Flight 90's nose shot up just seconds after takeoff? As the investigators know, the Boeing 737 tends to pitch up sharply if the wings are contaminated with ice or snow. But just when the evidence seems to be mounting, they realize something just doesn't add up. They're perplexed by First Officer Pettit's comments about his instrument readings.
Oh, God, look at that. That doesn't look right, does it?
To try and find out what was worrying him, they study the flight data recorder. Immediately, another mystery rears its head. They discover that survivor Joe Stiley was right. The 737 took 45 seconds to reach takeoff speed, 15 seconds longer than normal. If the aircraft was contaminated by ice and snow, this might slow takeoff slightly, but not for an entire 15 seconds. The team realized something else was wrong with the 737, and they don't know what it is. They could be back to square one. They can think of only one thing which would slow a 737's takeoff dramatically: insufficient thrust from the engines. But why would a crew take off without powering up properly? It seems an absurd idea. The riddle can't be solved by examining the engines. They are still at the bottom of the Potomac River. And Flight 90 was fitted with a pre-digital flight recorder which didn't monitor thrust levels. There's only one option left. The investigators scrutinized the low-level engine sounds picked up by the cockpit voice recorder. Using a technique called sound spectrum analysis, they translate these sound frequencies into thrust readings.
Yeah, it's 1.7.
That's too low.
The results are a shock. Both engines were running at a thrust level, or EPR, of 1.7. But the 737's takeoff EPR should be 2.04. The team are baffled. It looks as if the pilots took off without sufficient power.
Oh, God, look at that. That doesn't look right, does it?
But how could this happen?
Off. Start pressure. Up.
The investigators play the cockpit recording again and again, looking for clues.
LaGuardia's not accepting.
Then they pick up on a tiny detail.
Pitot heat? On. Anti-ice? Off. APU? Running.
Can we hear that again?
Shoulder harness.
The investigators are dumbfounded.
He said off.
Shoulder harness.
The recording is poor, but Captain Wheaton seems to say off when asked about the engine anti-ice system.
Anti-ice? Off.
Hendricks realizes one small word could unlock the mystery behind the disaster. He knows thrust readings for each engine are produced by two sensors, one in the inlet and one in the outlet. Together, they produce thrust readings by measuring the ratio between air pressure at the front and the back of the engine. But if the engine anti-ice system is off, snow and slush could freeze up the inlet sensors. On some other 737s, this has caused the sensors to send pilots faulty thrust readings, readings higher than the actual thrust produced by the engines. If this happened to Flight 90, the crew could, unwittingly, have taken off with insufficient thrust. This could be the final piece of the jigsaw. But Hendricks needs to prove it. He asks Boeing to carry out tests, confirming the effect of inlet sensors blocked by ice or snow. The results are dramatic. The engine quickly creates an EPR reading of 2.04. But in reality, it's running at an EPR of 1.7, exactly the same weaker thrust level revealed by the sound spectrum analysis of Flight 90's engines. This could explain First Officer Pettit's confusion.
No, that's not right. Maybe it is.
His EPR dial says 2.04, but his throttle position and his readings for exhaust heat and fuel flow reflect the lower EPR of 1.7.
I don't know.
But how could the pilots make the appalling error of forgetting to turn on their engine anti-ice system? And why didn't they abort takeoff when they realized something was wrong?
Once the roll started with these observations by the first officer, that takeoff should have been rejected.
The investigators study the pilot's records and discover that neither had much flying experience in winter conditions. But they also reveal something even more disturbing. Over the last 2 years, Captain Wheaton has had to retake 2 routine proficiency tests after receiving poor scores. His weak areas included adherence to regulations, checklist usage, and knowledge of aircraft systems. The revelation adds weight to the theory that pilot error played a key role in the disaster. But there are still 2 major pieces of evidence missing: Flight 90's engines. Without examining them, the team can't prove beyond doubt that the anti-ice system was off, or that the crash wasn't caused by an engine failure. Then, salvage squads lift the battered engines from the river. 13 days after the disaster, they're rushed to manufacturers Pratt & Whitney for examination. Technicians strip the engines down and painstakingly search for any sign of a mechanical problem. But they find nothing. Then they inspect the anti-ice system. One by one, they check the tubes which carry hot air to key areas of the engine. The results are decisive. The valves inside are closed. The anti-ice system hadn't been switched on. But would this be enough to bring down Flight 90? To find out, the team carries out tests in Boeing's state-of-the-art 737 flight simulator. To their surprise, reduced thrust of 1.7 EPR is just enough to keep the aircraft flying. But then, when they factor in the problems created by ice or snow contamination, they make the breakthrough they've worked so hard to reach. January 13th, 1982. A series of factors combine to encourage snow and ice to build up on Flight 90. The aircraft is sprayed with half the recommended amount of de-icing agent. Further delays allow more snow to gather on the 737. and the use of reverse thrust may have sprayed slush onto the wings and critical thrust sensors. 23 minutes to disaster.
Electrical.
Wheaton and Pettit leave their engine anti-ice system off. As a result, thrust sensors in both engines freeze up, causing them to send misleadingly high readings to the cockpit. 14 minutes to disaster. The pilots notice a thick layer of snow on both wings.
I mean, this one's got about a quarter to half an inch of snow on it all the way down.
But contrary to regulations, they don't turn back for more de-icing. 1 minute and 3 seconds to disaster. Pettit is confused by unusual readings on the flight deck.
Oh God, look at that. That doesn't look right, does it?
But his captain does not abort takeoff. 24 seconds to disaster. Flight 90 takes off with dials indicating thrust of 2.04 EPR. But because critical thrust sensors are frozen, the real thrust is only 1.7 EPR. At the same time, ice and snow clinging to the wings disrupt airflow dramatically, reducing lift. This changes the aerodynamics of the 737, causing the nose to pitch up sharply. The resulting drag reduces speed, which in turn reduces lift even further. 8 seconds to disaster. The loss of lift reaches a critical point. At an altitude of just 352 feet, the 46-ton aircraft stalls and falls out of the sky. 4:01 p.m. Flight 90 hits the 14th Street Bridge. The disaster claims 78 lives, including those killed on the bridge. After his recovery, survivor Joe Stiley left his executive job to work for himself. He's overwhelmed by emotion during a rare return to the scene of the crash.
I think more than anything else, I'm appreciating the 24 years I've lived since then. Like, I saw my kids grow up. I held my dad's hand when he passed away. I could have missed all that.
For flight attendant Kelly Duncan, the disaster was a turning point.
My prayers were answered when I heard that helicopter come. And instead of running away from God, I all of a sudden started wanting to run to God.
She quit her job as a flight attendant and is now a teacher at a Baptist school in Miami. Following the disaster, aviation authorities issue a series of directives to radically improve all aircraft de-icing procedures. They include measures to make sure thrust sensors don't become blocked by ice. The changes make flying safer for every aircraft that takes off in winter. They're relocating to Florida, where Jose has found a job in the construction industry. 2:20 p.m. Captain Wheaton expects the airport to reopen soon. He orders the ground crew to de-ice the 737.
Okay, guys, you can get started.
It's a routine procedure to remove snow and ice from the aircraft before takeoff. But a string of further delays keeps Flight 90 at Gate 12 for another hour. Clearing the runways takes longer than expected, and then there's a backlog of flights. There's nothing anyone on board can do but wait. Outside, the snowstorm continues.
I could see snow accumulating on the aircraft and all around the aircraft. But it snowed the entire time we were there.
When clearance to leave Gate 12 is given, there's another delay. Ice on the tarmac makes it difficult to move the 737.
We're too heavy for this ice.
Captain Wheaton decides to help out with a blast of reverse thrust from his engines.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna put a little reverse on them.
Are you sure?
No, don't worry, I'll be okay.
3:35 p.m. Flight 90 eventually begins taxiing to the runway 1 hour and 20 minutes behind schedule. It's a relief for flight attendant Kelly Duncan.
When we were finally moving away from the jetway, it was wonderful because I felt like we are finally on our way.
United States. Washington, D.C. January 13th, 1982. 12:30 p.m. Joe Stiley, an executive with a large telecommunications company, arrives at Washington National Airport with his secretary, Nikki Felch. Joe and Nikki are on a business trip to Tampa, Florida. They're scheduled to depart at 2:15 p.m. on board Air Florida Flight 90. Flying is a big part of Joe's life. He's a former Navy pilot, and his job involves regular trips around the world.
In those days, I was probably getting on a 737 and flying somewhere once to twice a week. It was almost a routine thing for me to be doing what I was doing that day.
Outside, the weather is anything but routine. Washington, D.C. is experiencing one of the worst winters in decades. Temperatures drop to -4 degrees Celsius as a snowstorm rages.
Nikki was definitely looking forward to getting where it was warm. She said, "I brought my swimming suit, did you?" And I had not remembered to even pack one.
Washington National Airport is just 5 kilometers south of Capitol Hill on the banks of the Potomac River. It's a major hub for flights from across the USA and Canada. On a normal day, more than 400 aircraft land here. But today, the airport is struggling.
A road full of potholes.
Flight 90 eventually hits takeoff speed.
Easy.
And leaves the ground.
Me too.
Suddenly, the nose pitches up sharply, and the aircraft starts to shake. In the cockpit, alarms warn the pilots that Flight 90 is about to stall. They have seconds to act, or the 46-ton aircraft and the 79 people on board will fall out of the sky. Flight 90's high nose position is creating so much drag that the aircraft is losing speed fast.
Easy, all we need is 500.
If the 737 slows down too much, it will stall and then simply drop. Captain Wheaton orders First Officer Pettit to lower the nose by pushing the control column forward.
Forward, forward.
But he can't drop the nose too far, or the plane will stop climbing.
Come on, she's barely climbing.
As the shaking intensifies, former pilot Joe Stiley fears the worst.
I remember vividly saying, "How the hell do I get out of this airplane now?" And knowing that it was too late, I was already kissing my rear end goodbye.
12 seconds after liftoff, Flight 90 has traveled 1 kilometer. 500 meters ahead, the heavy snow has created a traffic jam on the 14th Street Bridge over the Potomac River. Construction worker Marion Grant Jr. is on the northbound span. His truck has hardly moved for 15 minutes.
Traffic wasn't moving at all, like we were sit still.
Wheaton and Pettit go through their after-start checklist.
The ice? Off. APU. Running.
Flight 90 then falls in behind other aircraft queuing for takeoff.
2 window exits at the center of the cabin, and 2 doors at the front.
Boy, this is bad. Probably the worst snow I've ever seen.
Seatbelts are released as shown.
Both pilots can see snow on their wings. Pettit is concerned.
You know, it's been a while since we've been de-iced.
3:59 p.m. Flight 90 is cleared for takeoff.
Position and hold.
Flight attendants, please take your seats.
At the rear of the passenger cabin, Kelly Duncan straps herself in. Joe Stiley, Nikki Felch, and Priscilla Tirado are just a few meters away. 3:59 p.m. and 45 seconds.
Throttles.
The 737 finally begins to roll down the runway. Seconds later, thrust readings jump past the target level for takeoff.
Oh, God, look at that. That don't look right, does it?
Pettit responds by easing the throttles a touch.
Yes, it is. There's 80.
But now, it's taking longer than usual to reach takeoff speed of 144 knots.
That's not right.
And there are strange readings on the flight deck.
120.
Joe Stiley is worried.
We were nowhere near the normal speeds that I was used to feeling every week in a 737. Going down that runway was like riding in a backcountry.
To stay open in the heavy snow. 1:38 p.m. All flights are grounded while snowplows clear the runways. The operation is expected to take an hour.
We regret to inform you that due to the adverse weather conditions, all flights will be grounded for at least an hour while snowplows clear the runways.
At Gate 12, Air Florida Flight 90, a Boeing 737, is held up by the delay.
It seems like every year it gets worse and worse.
Yeah, I know.
I can deal with rain, but this snow is...
Captain Larry Wheaton is 34. He's a family man with 2 children. Roger Pettit, his first officer, is just 31. He's a former US Air Force fighter pilot with an excellent record. But both men have less than 3 years' experience flying 737s. At 2 p.m., Flight 90 begins boarding, 20 minutes late. On the 2-hour flight to Tampa, the aircraft will be just over half full. There are 71 adult passengers and 3 young children. Many are helped aboard by 22-year-old flight attendant Kelly Duncan. For her, the job is a dream come true.
I loved my life as a flight attendant. Whenever I went anywhere in my uniform, people would always comment about it, and it was something that I was very proud of doing and something that I really enjoyed doing.
Near Joe and Nikki are Priscilla Tirado, her 2-month-old son Jason, and her husband,